Greetings, everyone. My name is Barbara Culberson. I'm the program manager for Family Strengthening Families.
And I'm Veronica King, the systems navigator here with Project Reach at the Discovery Center.
And we are here today to just kind of take some time out to talk about, Veronica, what April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Mhm.
And so on our podcast today, we want to kind of go over just some things in general as it relates to raising awareness for this particular problem that we have in our society. We do know, Veronica, and I'm just happy to be back on with you again. We've done this before,
Mhm.
not for this particular topic, because it is a serious topic.
Right.
Um, but just happy to share this time and space with you to kind of help our families or our listening audience um, just gain some knowledge about this particular thing that occurs in our society. We do know that child abuse is preventable, so it doesn't have to be. And we do know that it thrives in silence. And so, what we want to do is do some things to kind of raise our level of awareness so we can begin to deal with this. So, when we talk about child abuse, Veronica, um, in kind of layman's terms, what would you say that child abuse is?
Any form um of it could be a physical form or a verbal form of any type of action or anything against a child that would cause harm.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that would cause harm to that child, whether it be present harm or any future harm that it might pose.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so if we're looking at this from an adult perspective, so an adult doing something or not doing something um, that can put a child in harm's way, that's really
Right.
child abuse, whether it's intentional or not. It's still
Right. Mhm.
abusive. I know you were kind of listing a few of the different types, and one of the types is neglect. So we're kind of, I guess we can just kind of say we have physical, which you can see.
Right.
That's bruises, cuts, burns, stuff like that, broken bones, emotional abuse words, um, using harmful words, slogans um, or something like that. And then you have sexual abuse, and
Mhm.
then we have neglect.
Right.
And so sometimes people don't want to call neglect abuse, but it is.
It
When you
is.
don't get your
Mhm.
son or your daughter a coat in this winter, that's abuse.
Right.
Yeah, not taking them
And
to the
like you
doctor's
like
appointment.
you said, Miss Barbara, it could be intentional or unintentional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think people need to understand. Sometimes it's overlooked because maybe you didn't intend to do it, but it could be neglect.
Mm-hmm. So, Veronica, as we'll get into some specifics about the different types in just a moment. But in general, what would you say would be some of the warning signs that if someone were to, just kind of like pay attention if you see something like this happening in the community with a child, with a neighbor, with your child,
Mhm.
a family member's child, what would be some general signs that a child may be being abused?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind will be a change in that child's behavior, especially
Mhm.
if it's your child or a child that have some type of contact with often. You kind of know their personality and just kind of know that child's routine. Anytime you see a change in their routine, a change in their behavior, maybe they're being more withdrawn, standing off from people, especially if it's sometimes, if a child is not wanting to be around a certain person that normally they would be around, that's not always saying something's wrong, but that's a good flag to look for. Also, just you might see those physical signs, marks,
Mhm.
bruises,
Mhm.
burns sometimes, change in maybe bedwetting,
Mhm.
things like that. And also, Miss Barbara, just when you talk about neglect, the clothing, like you gave the example, not having a coat during the weather, colder weather, or if they don't have appropriate clothing, maybe they don't have the underclothing, the shoes, or their clothing is too small or not clean, things like that. Also, sometimes with their eating, they might not be having enough food to eat. So you might see them overeat, hide food, steal food. That's one of the things I think some people sometimes think, oh, they're just doing that. But if you check into it, it might be a reason behind
Mhm.
their need for additional food. So, it's things that sometimes you might overlook because you might think, oh, that's just that child acting a certain way. But anything that's out of the norm or doesn't appear to be normal would be something you don't have to know 100% that is abuse, but something just to check into.
Right, exactly. And I was just there thinking too, sometimes parents may leave their children alone.
Mhm.
So where you find situations that you're aware of, where there's lack of parental supervision, maybe that child is not old enough to be home alone,
Right.
for prolonged periods of time. And so that is another sign, a warning sign that something could possibly be happening. Then just take a look at it from, you know, if you saw a parent that was perhaps maybe being too demanding on their child. Maybe their child is capable, has reached, they're doing the best that they can. Uh, and then, for example, I guess I could say if a parent just insisting that a child make all A's, and maybe the child is making C's, and that's the best they can do. And if C is the best that that child can do, and you're insisting as a parent on them making A's, then that is also abusive, and it's something similar to that. If you have a parent that maybe sees their child as a burden,
Yeah.
A liability or worthless or just bad. Sometimes you hear people say, I really don't say that you're a bad child. The behavior may be, but the child is still your child. And so we don't want to name them as being bad. All right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Veronica, let's just talk about a few of the risk factors before we go into the types
Mhm.
specifically. But the risk factors, what would put a parent or a child, a situation, make it be more at risk for abuse to occur? What would you say would some of those risk factors be?
Well, some of the risk factors could be if you gave a good example just then too, Miss Barbara, like that lack of supervision.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes having a parent who's not in the home
Mm-hmm.
as often. Also, if you have a parent who has a physical or some type of disability that limits their supervision. Also, oftentimes when children, like you said, have what some people may consider a behavior problem, those children are often faced with more abuse because people don't really have the patience or the understanding to help that child through those issues. Um, or if you have a child with special needs, again, not having that education or that patience or support to care for that child. Two, if a child is sometimes from place to place, children who are out of their own home setting, whether they're living from a family member's home to another family member's home or not with their parents, those children are at increased risk of support as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it could vary. You have some children who, maybe they have some type of uh, uh, like a teen parent who, you're having to be out of your own home. Now you're having to protect yourself as well as your child. That puts them at a high risk because now they're in another population outside of just being a child themselves. So there are several things that could increase um, that risk. And one of the things too, Miss Barbara, is just
Mm-hmm.
parents or caregivers not understanding child development, not knowing
Exactly.
what's appropriate and what's not
Mm-hmm.
appropriate at a certain age, or understanding how some type of trauma or some incident can actually set a child back or have them stuck at a certain developmental stage. So
Mm-hmm.
then if the child isn't, like you gave example with the grades, if a child isn't acting the way a caregiver would like for that child or want to see that child act, then that would could possibly increase the risk of abuse as well.
Mhm. Veronica, you just mentioning understanding of child growth and development. And I was just thinking, like in some of our classes, we do talk about this because
Mhm.
um, a lot of parents just want to beat the child. First thing, a child misbehaves, and let me just give them a good beat down.
Right.
And the and I always try to use reason with that. If beating a child was the answer to correcting that problem, then we could just line children up, give them a good beat down, and we wouldn't have any children with behavior problems, correct? But
And we
everybody
see that's
knows
not the answer. That's not work. It
that's
doesn't
not
work,
the
right?
answer. That's not the answer,
So
because
yeah,
if something was the answer, you could just do it and it would routinely
mhm,
work, and you wouldn't have to revisit that. But we
right.
do know that does not work. So I guess what we're trying to try other, things and other options. There are other options
There's other
besides
methods of
just doing,
discipline.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And what we're really supposed to be doing as parents is training and teaching,
Exactly.
because they're not going to stay kids. And so,
And Miss
so
Barbara,
I,
you want to always teach the child or let the child
mhm,
know, because if you're just spanking them and
mhm,
they're like, okay, what is this for? What happened? But like you
mhm,
said, teaching them, training them, because
mhm,
as they grow older, you want them to learn why the choice they made or the behavior they made, the behavior they showed was inappropriate. You want to
mhm,
teach them the correct way to
the
do it the
correct.
next time.
And I think that's one of the things that we, and when we're doing our classes, that we find over and over again, just get into appropriate disciplinary methods for the child's age.
Mhm.
And so I think that, any parent could benefit from just doing some research and taking some classes and getting to know what some of your options are. Because when we talking about this, you mentioned earlier that some of it is not intentional, but it's still abuse.
Mhm.
It's still abuse. And so we want to be able to advocate for our children, and so that they can live and grow and be safe in the environment that they're growing up in. So let's go and get into a couple of these types of abuse. The first one, you kind of talked a little bit about it, Veronica. Physical abuse is any type of contact that results in bodily harm, bruising, or physically restraining a child improperly. And so when we look at that, that's something that you can kind of see. That type of abuse can be seen. I think I was reading somewhere, especially like if you see a child with two black eyes, both eyes are, that's not an accidental, let me fall and hit,
Right.
bump into something. That's intentional. Broken bones, burns, burn marks, and things of that nature, things that show a print on the skin. Um, those are some of the physical signs. And so we want to be careful of those. Let's talk about emotional abuse, Veronica.
Which is
Um,
one of the hardest forms of abuse to
mhm,
evidence.
yeah, it's not easily seen because it's internal.
Right.
Yeah. And it's sad, using words. It is anything said or done that is hurtful or threatening to a child, such as name calling, belittling a child,
Mhm.
or making threats of harm.
Mhm.
So yeah, you're no good. You're fat.
Mhm.
um, all of those things will can have a very negative impact on a child.
Exactly. And
And
Miss Barbara, if I can add,
Mhm,
sometimes that's like, people might not think of it this way, but it's not saying that it's okay to leave any type of marks, bruises, or physically abuse a child. But some people might think, how I remember back in elementary school, they would say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but
mhm,
words may never hurt. Words hurt and they
or
last.
mhm,
Those words have lasting impressions on
mhm,
the children. So you might have suffered some type of emotional abuse when you were 5 and you're still
mhm,
dealing with it, possibly when you're 25, or
mhm.
later. So emotional abuse does in fact hurt just as worse, if not worse, than the physical abuse and any other form of abuse.
Exactly. And this says some of the indicators that a child may be emotionally abused is if you have evidence of self-injury on the child, like they're cutting themselves, um, burning themselves, drug use, um, if they seem to separate from reality, drift off into fantasy world, living in a world not in this one, um, you know, um, they're constantly tense and on guard, these are just some indicators that maybe they're being emotionally abused. And as a parent or as an adult, you want to be, check into those type things. If they have attempted suicide or talk badly about themselves, before you say something, I'm gonna say it. you know,
Right.
yeah. So that's for emotional abuse. Oh, and this one, even all these types of abuse are very, very um um I don't know, I will say they're serious topics, and they can really be saddening, or disgusting. But sexual abuse is another one. And this is any inappropriate physical contact or non-physical act with a child. So I want to say the non-physical could be something like showing them pornography, or taking naked pictures, or something like that. All of those would be considered forms of sexual abuse. And so, Veronica, some of the signs that maybe a child, or indicators that maybe a child has been sexually abused, could be, you know.
Um, you know, sometimes you made a good point, Miss Barbara, when you mentioned about even if they're not physically touched,
Mhm,
in an inappropriate manner, but maybe
mhm,
just exposure. Sometimes when you have younger children who knows about sexual language, and this, they shouldn't know at that age, they're
mhm,
talking about things that are inappropriate, sexually inappropriate. Also, you might see physically their body changes,
mhm,
they're going through puberty earlier. You're seeing changes in their body that is
mhm,
not within that level of development. Also, you might see some type of STDs in children,
mhm.
pregnancy in girls. Also, again, that behavior change. They might not say anything, but you can see something is wrong just in the change of their behavior.
Yes.
Also, bedwetting, not able to control their bowel movements, things like that could also changes in their appetite. And sometimes, um, this doesn't mean there's some type of abuse, because this can happen even, if you have a child who is, or youth who's anxious about things, but those nervous stomachs, or just
Mhm,
having some type of illness, but you might not be able to physically see anything wrong, but they're
mhm,
they're sick. There's something wrong and they can't really say it. But it's like they start to internalize what's going on. Or the nightmares. Some children have night tremors or nightmares because of things that are going on. So I would just say, with any of these forms of abuse, Miss Barbara, anytime you notice a change, it
mhm,
might not mean there's some type of abuse going on, but
mhm,
anytime you notice a change, always check into it and just try
mhm,
to find out what it is. Because anytime a child shows a change in their behavior, there's a reason behind it.
mhm. Exactly. And I was just thinking as well, we could include in here um poor hygiene, or excessive bathing, or
Mhm.
just cannot get clean. So they're just constantly taking a bath, a shower, or long time in the bathroom, or not even taking a bath,
Right.
going the other, opposite of excessive bathing to not wanting to take a bath.
Right.
Um,
That lack of hygiene overall.
yes. Yeah. So, these are what we're talking about with you and sharing with you today are things that you can watch for, that you can be mindful of if you see something happening with some child that you may know, or some child that you have an opportunity to be in contact with. Then this is where you may be able to take, just kind of do, is there something that I might need to do to intervene? And we'll talk about that, what it is that we want you to do if you suspect something. As we get on over into this broadcast, we're almost getting a little bit closer to the end. But one particular aspect of sexual abuse that we haven't talked about, Veronica, is sexual grooming. And
Right.
let's just kind of share what that is, Veronica.
Yeah. So, people call it different things, and they look at it differently. But sexual grooming is the act of an adult or a perpetrator, trying to basically luring that child in. And that could be, you might have, I'm just going to use an example, a neighbor who maybe, has been around this child and you don't think anything about it, or the parent don't think anything about it. And they're constantly buying this particular child, candy or toys, but it's like you're favoring this child over other children. You just kind of single that one out, and you're showing them more attention. Maybe
Mhm,
they spend more time with them,
mhm,
make them feel comfortable that they can trust them, taking them on trips, doing things for them, special things. They might even have a special language that they
mhm,
use with that child, to make that child feel comfortable, or, telling them not to tell. They have, sharing secrets. And it's important to always remind children and youth, don't keep secrets, no matter who it is, don't keep those secrets. Always tell a trusted adult if someone asks you to keep a secret. But basically, when they're grooming them, they're prepping them, they're getting them to a point where they're comfortable enough to basically prey on them. And grooming, you see it different, it's different things that they can do. If it's a teenager, buying them cell phones, buying them things they know they like, giving them money.
mhm,
Younger children, giving them time, letting them play games, buying them things. But anything that that perpetrator is doing to basically get that child comfortable. And it can be also, Miss Barbara, showing them pornography or
mhm,
exposing them to things. It could be music, it could be videos, it could be pictures, or just even language. But exposing those children to things that they shouldn't be exposed to. And,
mhm,
and grooming, like I said, it's different ways that they can do it. But
mhm,
basically, it's anything that that person is doing,
mhm,
that perpetrator is doing, to prepare that child to basically be a victim. And
mhm.
grooming can also, the perpetrator could basically be lining up older children to start grooming younger children. So it's not always adults who are doing the grooming. It could also be an older child who
Mhm.
is grooming a younger child. So
Exactly.
that's something important for people to remember as well, Miss Barbara,
Yeah.
that perpetrators are not always just adults. It could also be children who are older than the victim.
And speaking of that, Veronica, I also want to kind of just add into, because we work with a lot of single parents,
Mhm.
and we find this happening a lot. You think someone is interested in you, and really they have sexual predators have a preference. A lot of
Mhm.
them do. And so if a person's preference is a 9-year-old boy and you got an 8-year-old boy, they got time to groom you and the child,
Mhm.
and so they'll start off as though they like you, and then they're really trying to get to your child. And so
Exactly.
these are just some things that we have to be mindful of, and more aware of. Is that really, we just can't. Our children are too valuable that we just can't allow and put trust in everyone to take care of them or to be in their lives. So we
Right.
have to be a little bit more careful. I think we have one more category of type of abuse, and that's neglect, Veronica. And of course, I think you mentioned a little bit that it's a failure to provide for the basic needs of a child. And you know, there's a pattern that exists there. You know, you're just not doing what is necessary to take care of your child. And so what are some of the indicators of that a neglect is taking place?
So, Ms. Barbara, if and sometimes, things can happen, it can be isolated, if maybe you just fell short, a parent or caregiver just fell short and wasn't able to buy, extra
Mhm,
shoes or whatever. Those are
mhm,
isolated incidences. But if you have ongoing
mhm,
situations where children's needs aren't met, no food in the home, no lights on in the home,
mhm,
utilities, water, basic needs, food, clothing, the shelter, instability of housing. That's something that sometimes people might not consider to be neglect. But if they don't have adequate and stable housing, that could be neglect. Also, educational neglect. There's different forms of neglect. So if your child is not coming to school, going to school, if they're not having assignments completed, not having the help, the educational support in place, and
mhm.
that's causing them to fail or be behind, and it's not isolated, it's ongoing. You're just, that caregiver is not providing the educational support, that could be a form of neglect as well, Ms. Barbara.
Mhm.
So anytime, anything um that's not being met for that child, the basic needs for a child. Children aren't able to go out and work and maintain on their
Mhm.
own. So it's up to the adults to do that for them. So if that adult is not able to provide and it's an ongoing situation, then that will be neglect.
And you know, when we're talking about just overall child abuse, we want to remind everyone that a child, children are learning what normal is. They don't know normal. They're having to learn. When they're born, the only thing they know to do is naturally is cry.
Mhm.
Everything else becomes learned from their environment. And so if they're growing up and into this environment where abuse is taking place, they begin to think that's normal, and it's not normal. And so, you know, they'll start telling themselves things about, that may not even, well, that is not true. And this really damages what we call the true self. Who they are as a person, who we are as a person has now been damaged by internally processing that something as normal that is not normal. And so we want to make sure that we're helping our children to know that they don't have to blame themselves for these type things, because sometimes they will internalize that and say, I caused this to happen. If I would have just did this and I did it, that's why this happened to me, or
Right.
it's my fault because I'm bad, or I don't deserve any better. These are all lies that abuse gets planted into the psyche of those kids, and it's very, very difficult to get this turned around. Of course, that's why one of the symbols for child abuse prevention is the pinwheel, because throughout the history, um, pinwheel has been used to represent an opportunity for change, for newness. It represents having something that may have been a problem or a challenge, but now you're turning this obstacle that it was into an opportunity that it can be. And so that's what we want to say to our children, and that have maybe have had to experience this evil is to be able to know that this does not define who you are as a person. And so your future can still be better than your past. And so this is what we want to communicate to our children. I think that's one of the best things that we can do as a parent or as an adult, is have an opportunity for where a kid feels safe talking to you, sharing information with you, and you can't wait till they're teenagers, okay? It has to come up through the years being open and talking and sharing, and developing a relationship. And I'm so thankful I had an aunt that was like that for me, and I could talk to her about anything. And the reason why I can say that's so very, very important, because I had a mother that I couldn't. She
Mhm.
was one of those dictator type mothers, and she just was like, you couldn't really tell her a lot of stuff. You had to pick and choose what you could share with her. But my aunt, it didn't matter. And so those are the kinds of relationships that help children be able to thrive in society. And so, Veronica, I want you to share just a little bit about reporting today before we leave, because if someone suspects abuse has occurred, or if a child presents itself and say something has happened,
Mhm.
what should and the adult in the situation do?
Okay. And Miss Barbara, before I do that, I forgot to mention about domestic violence
Okay.
also. I just want to add that in that
Okay.
some people might not see that as forms of abuse, but if a child is in an environment that is unsafe for them, that could also be neglect or failure to protect on a parent's part. So I just wanted to throw that one in too before I
Hmm.
forgot about it, Miss Barbara.
Exactly.
But mandated reporting. We're all mandated reporters. If you see something, you should say something. You don't have to know 100% that this is what happened, but if you suspect it, report it. And I like to always tell people to remember, when you're reporting, give as much information as you can. Don't hold anything back so that it could be investigated. But here in the state of Mississippi, there is a centralized intake number that you could call, and that number is 1-800-222-8000. And also, you're able to go online through the Mississippi Department of Child Protection Services website. If you search that online, they also have an option for you to make an online report, and you just, again, give as much information as you can. But the number is 1-800-222-8000. And if a child does disclose some things to you or says some things to you, remember not to question them. Don't, lead them into saying more. Just let them share. If you can write down, what they tell you, get the information, and then share that when you make the report. But it's really important to remember not to question the child and to stay calm. You don't want to be upset and irate, and then they shut down and they don't tell you anything else, because you have to remember it takes a lot for them to report it anyway, to let anyone know. So you want to try to be as calm as possible. Just let the child talk, and then take that information, and if possible, don't report it right in front of that child, because they might ask you questions while you're on the phone or making that report. So make sure you can, when you're making the report, you have time where you can give as much information as possible, and you're not in the presence of that child if possible.
Yeah. And
And
not.
call 911 if it's something you see that that
Mhm.
child is in imminent danger right then. You don't have to wait to call the intake. Call 911, and if possible, stay within, eyesight of the child, so you can kind of monitor and let them know, let the emergency um officials know, kind of keep them updated on what's going on or where the child is.
Mhm. And Veronica, I think one of the things is not to make promises to the child as well, um, because you don't want to further add to the trauma of promising something and then that
Exactly.
something doesn't happen. And
Exactly. Be as
so,
honest as possible with the child.
yeah. And yeah, so those are just some of the things. And I think the other thing about reporting, Veronica, sometimes people may be a little hesitant. This may be my sister's child or my neighbor's kid, and I still have to have a relationship, they're next door neighbors, or this is my family member. And if I do this, it's going to cause all kind of trouble. So can they report anonymously, Veronica?
Yes. So you don't have to give your name or anything like that. If you make a report, whether you make it online or whether you call it in, all they need is just like when you sit on Crime Stoppers on the news. All they need is your information.
Hmm.
All they need is the information. They might ask if you would like to leave a callback number if they need more information. Maybe they can't locate the person, or maybe they have a number and the address wrong and they just want to make sure it's the right address. They might ask, hey, would you like to be contacted if needed? But you can make the report anonymously. You don't have to leave your name or anything. And one thing about it, people might guess, hey, that was my sister that made the report, my cousin, because that was the last person I saw with my child. People can always guess and assume, but that doesn't mean that they know exactly who made that report. So you're right, Mr. Barber. You can just make a report without leaving your name.
Mhm. And I think, as Veronica, if you're thinking of any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience today, but I just want to remind people that basically this, to show you the severity of this, about every 10 seconds, a child is abused. That's in the course of a minute, 60 seconds. That's 6 children. And I'm just say that that's always one too many.
Too many.
That's just too many. And so, especially since it can be preventable. So I just want to encourage our audience today, if we each did our part looking out for our children, because how many times do we see on the news where things have fallen through the cracks, and we're now talking about, I wish I woulda, coulda, and then the child is now dead. So and we find that happening just too often. And I think that's how this really national campaign even got started, with a grandmother who had experienced this. She did try to get some help, but it was too late. And her grandson ended up dead, at the hands of her daughter's, well, actually, a husband. So we want to make sure that we're doing our part, Veronica. But do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our audience before we end on today?
No, just again, if you see it, report it. Don't second guess it. It's
Mhm.
better to be safe than sorry. And just remember that we're all mandated reporters, and we can make a report here in our state by calling 1-800-222-8000
Thank you,
or
Veronica.
911 if it's an emergency.
911, if it's an emergency, yes. But thank you so much, Veronica, for sharing and being with us on the broadcast today. And I'm just going to leave everyone with this quote from Nelson Mandela. And he says, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. And I would just say that is true. If you want to find out what kind of society you're living in, just take a look at how that society is treating its children. Because children can't help themselves. It requires adults to look out for them. So I just want to thank you for tuning in today. And until the next time, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.